Welcome, beloved listeners, to another Late Night Live. A strange hush has fallen across our nation. There doesn't seem to be a federal or state election looming for at least a fortnight, and so we decided to fill that vacuum by checking out electioneering in both Cambodia and France. Shortly, I'll introduce you to a quite extraordinary Cambodian MP, a member of the opposition, whose passion, whose courage is, breathtaking. But first, let's rocket over to France and have a think about what's going on there. It's incumbency's no great help, is it, these days? It doesn't matter where you are. You seem to be chucked out of office pretty promptly. And if you recall, almost all governments in the Eurozone have been tossed out by voters at recent elections. And when France goes to the polls on May 6, at least one of my guests is convinced that a similar fate awaits President Sarkozy. In fact, Dominique Moisi, who will be joining us from Paris, predicts that Francois Hollande will win the presidential elections, ending socialist absence from the glamorous Élysée Palace for 17 years. Dominique argues that a majority of the French want to punish a president who's fallen from their graces, but others feel that such a cunning political animal as Sarkozy might turn things around. But what is clear is that the electoral battleground will be fought over France's middle class, men and women who have low paychecks but earn too much for social benefits, too little for tax breaks. And France's sluggish economic growth have left this class, who make up more than 50% of the population, a bit peeved. So, to understand how the middle class is receiving the presidential campaign, I'm joined by Dr Dominique Moisi, founder of the French Institute of International Affairs and professor at the Paris Institute of Political Studies. Dominique's author of The Geopolitics of Emotion, How Cultures of Fear, Humiliation and Hope are Reshaping the World. And it's my pleasure to also welcome Nabila Ramdani. Nabila's a Paris-born freelancer, Algerian descent, who casts a wide net. She specialises in French politics, Islamic affairs and the Arab world. And just looking through her CV, there's hardly a media outlet in the UK or France to which she doesn't contribute. So I welcome you both to our little wireless program. Dominique, what's going on? Why do the French middle class want to kick Sarkozy in the bottom?
By the end of the day, because of the perception of his essence. They don't like him. They don't want to see him 5 more years on their television screen. It's not so much, in a way, the performance of Sarkozy that they are rejecting than his personality. It's very emotional. It's not so much that they are in love with François Hollande. In fact, they are quite disappointed by his campaign. It's a negative referendum on the incumbent president.
I suppose when you have such a high degree of celebrity politics, people can get very bored with the celeb.
Yes, and the campaign itself was extraordinarily boring because you had a man who, in soccer term, had scored early on during the game, François Hollande, and who tried desperately not to see the equalization by his opponent and practiced a very defensive strategy, like the catenaccio strategy, which was played by Italian coaches 20 years ago. Very efficient as far as the result is concerned, very boring as far as the show is concerned.
Dominique, I'm afraid your soccer metaphors are lost on me. It's not just that football code, it's all of them. Before I bring in Nabila, has he achieved anything of significance?
The president, yes, he did. And in fact, France did not collapse.
Well,
during
that's not a bad effort.
during a very difficult moment when he was at the head of the European Union. He stood firm. He started reforms, but not enough, not courageously and strongly enough. And he made a difference in two foreign countries, in Ivory Coast and in Libya, with his interventionist action. So on balance, his record is far from negative. Nevertheless, he will probably lose power because the French don't like him, because the French see a very high unemployment rate, and because structurally, never in the history of the Fifth Republic has a political party been able to win 4 consecutive races. And that would be the case if Sarkozy were to be re-elected.
Now, Nabila, we've mentioned the perceived plight of the middle class. Let's look at the working class. They seem to be split. Well, it's not unusual, I suppose, in France, between the extreme right and extreme left.
Yes, indeed. And the unpopularity of President Sarkozy and his desperate attempt to capitalize on the Toulouse killings, when a young man of Muslim descent killed 7 people a few days ago, President Sarkozy was very prompt to try to make political capital out of this tragedy, and he yet again exploited his favorite theme, really, which is to demonize, stigmatize, and indeed criminalize the Muslim community as a whole. This hasn't quite worked. In fact, he enjoyed a slight bounce in the polls in the wake of that, but it keeps, disappearing with him going head-to-head with Hollande, even in the first round. But what has clearly happened, and I think why people are attracted to the extremes, it's because of the personality, or dare I say the lack of personality, of the socialist candidate François Hollande. He's too much of a Mr. Normal. He's soft, he's indecisive, he has a vague program. And this benefited very much to the far left candidate, the communist candidate, who is more passionate. He's very anti-capitalist. He promised, for example, an immediate 20% rise in the minimum wage, 100% tax on earnings over 360,000 euros.
Sorry,
and
say that again. What tax is he proposing?
He's proposing a 100% tax rate on earnings above 360,000 euros a year. So that's very radical indeed.
One has to say, wow, that's an amazing.
Absolutely, but He's enjoyed a jump from 9% to 15%. And I think one of the things that makes him even more popular is that he promised to withdraw from NATO and to apologize to the Algerian government for the war in Algeria. And this is crucial for North African voters, because this year is the 50th anniversary of the War of Independence. And if I may, I would disagree very strongly with Dominique about Sarkozy's legacy in terms of foreign policy. I cannot possibly let Dominique say that Sarkozy's legacy in the Ivory Coast and Libya was impressive and impressed the French. I mean, in Ivory Coast, what effectively happened is the French government put a puppet of the French government in place, and in Libya, I mean, it's very unimpressive. The very, the double dealings between the French government and Gaddafi are more and more coming to the fore, with alleged, scandals, with Gaddafi allegedly funding his 2007 presidential campaign. He has a lot to answer on that front.
Before I give Dominique the right of reply, Nabila, I'd like you to look at the right, because over the years, looking at France, one's blood oft freezes at the efforts of Le Pen. Now, I understand his daughter is the third woman in this election. How's she performing?
She has benefited massively from President Sarkozy's divisive policies and indeed his stigmatization of ethnic minority groups in general, not only Muslims, but also the Gypsy community, for example. Remember, Sarkozy wanted to deport and indeed managed to deport members of the Gypsy community, and by dismissing European laws in that respect. The Toulouse killings have given Marine Le Pen, an opportunity to use that tragedy to her own advantage. Homegrown terrorists are the ultimate bogeyman for rabble-rousing politicians like herself, it has to be said.
Dominique, do you wish to defend yourself from Nabila's counter-attack?
Well, not to defend myself, but to defend Sarkozy in that case. And since I'm not predicting his victory, since I'm not on his side, you will admit that I tend to be objective. No, I think without France, it is very likely that Gaddafi would still be in power in Libya. And is that the scenario you want to see? And I think the replacement of Gbagbo has been a positive sign. And we've seen later on in Africa the demise of Wade and the victory in a proper democratic setting of his opponent. So there is progress going on. As far as NATO is concerned, I don't think sincerely that part of the popularity of Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's an incredible, romantic, crypto-revolutionary candidate, I don't think his popularity is linked in any way to his intention to see France departing from the integrated military body of NATO. I think the French don't care really about whether France is part of NATO or not. When France returned to the military body under Sarkozy, there were no demonstrations in the streets. It simply happened, and that was that. So this is my little rebuttal in defense of Nicolas Sarkozy, if I may say.
Dominique Moisi, and sorry, Nabila, let me just remind the listener that you, Nabila Ramdani, and Dominique Moisi are my guests on LNL, on RN, and around the world via various avant-garde technical platforms, and we're discussing the forthcoming French elections. Nabila, I want to go back to the middle class. One of France's leading sociologists, Louis Cheval, has said that fear is the middle class status is no longer a given. Not even for those who have good jobs. Now, this resonates in Australia. Quote, in the 1970s and 80s, wage-based society, your status was very, very stable. Now it's more and more unclear. There is increasing uncertainty over what will happen. How disgruntled, in your view, Nabila, is the middle class?
It is very disgruntled indeed, because the status is no longer a given, and I think that's a fair assessment. Social mobility in France has regressed. The previous generations could expect, for example, to stay in the same job for a very long period of time, or indeed for life, and not just civil servants. But now, in France, anybody's career path is very uncertain. People are expected to change careers several times in their lifetime. Even the status of civil servant is not guaranteed any longer. And for young people extracted from the middle classes, in fact, their situation is far worse than their parents' situation, for example.
And we're seeing the same thing in France as we're seeing around the world, and that is that the unemployed are better and better educated. In other words, having a university degree is no longer a guarantee of a good job.
Indeed, and that's why in the most educated echelon, you see a brain drain effectively happening with young people who have the ability, especially the financial ability to leave the country, are going towards Anglo-Saxon economies. They are in the US, they are in Australia, they are in London increasingly.
Dominique, how different is what we're seeing today to France's so-called golden age, the 30 glorious years as it's known, from 45 to 75, when the average standard of living rose steadily, in fact almost doubled.
Yes, it's a new period, and the French are painfully aware of that. I fully agree with what Nabila has been saying just now. And the French are comparing themselves obsessively with another country, Germany, which seems to be doing much better at all levels, from social integration to competitiveness. And they are asking themselves, why are we today nearly in a different league from Germany? What went wrong? What did we do wrong? And clearly there is a lack of confidence and a rather negative introspection that dominates the French field.
Nabila, what was it like growing up Muslim in France?
It's not a terribly good experience, I have to say. And especially under President Sarkozy, not only as a president, but also, remember, he was interior minister before he was elected president in 2007. And since then, his policies have been constantly stigmatizing the Muslim community, with his interior minister, Claude Guéant, going as far as describing Islam and indeed Muslims as a problem in France. And there have been a series of policies targeting this community. France is 6 million Muslim strong community in particular, and that includes the burqa ban, of course, but also policies on halal meat, and also banning people from praying in the street because of the lack of mosques. More crucially, Muslims, especially young Muslim male, are constantly checked, are constantly submitted to identity checks by police forces, and they have the highest unemployment rate in certain areas, up to 60%, and that's all to do because of their ethnic origin, a link to their religion, and indeed an undesirable postcode on their CV.
Dominique, there's about 6 million Muslims in France. Are very many of them part of the middle class?
Not enough. And it's clear that if you are a young Muslim in France, living in a poor suburbs outside of a big city, you have to be very strong and to be very lucky in order to succeed. Some of them do. Some of them are models for others, but they are not enough. And I agree with Nabila. What we've seen in the last few years has not been good, neither ethically, nor morally, nor politically or economically. A feeling of alienation of those young people has dramatically increased in French society. It didn't go in the right direction.
Nabila, last week marked the first anniversary of a story I remember vividly covering, and that was the ban of the wearing of full-face veils in public. The Toulouse terrorist told police that he launched his attacks partly in revenge for the burqa ban. How concerned are the French voters about the so-called enemy within? I know it's being enthusiastically marketed not only on the hard right, but increasingly in what used to be the centre.
Yes, indeed, and the Toulouse shootings no doubt triggered a debate about Islam in France. but for all the wrong reasons. Dramatic events tend to provoke extreme debates, and that's what President Sarkozy has been trying to provoke across France by he was terribly at pains to try to explain his assault on alleged Islamists in the wake of the Mera killing, but also trying also equally hard, not to link, an assault on Islam with the Toulouse tragedy. But clearly picking out Mohamed Merah as representative of the Muslim community in France is like picking out pedophiles or rapists in any society and say that they represent that society. They simply do not.
Dominique, does Sarkozy revel in his reputation as the president of the rich, or does he find this an embarrassment?
Well, he's a very contradictory man. In some ways, he's rejected by the elites because he's not part of them. He didn't do the right schools, didn't go through National School of Administration, Polytechnique. He doesn't behave in the proper elitist manner. He is, in many ways, what people would say, vulgar in the way he addresses people in this
That's a sort of attitude that Margaret Thatcher copped, didn't it, from the establishment in Britain?
Yes, there is an element of that. In fact, he's an incredibly gifted politician. At some point, I call him the artist of French politics. As a campaigner, he has an energy which is unique. And there is that contradiction. He is presenting himself as the candidate of the people against the elite. But at the same time, he has a fascination with money, which he has not overcome fully. And that fascination, in fact, alienates him from the middle class, from the poor, but also from the conservative rich who try to be as discreet as possible about their wealth.
Carla Bruni defended themselves, their taste for luxury, telling a journalist we're modest people, and apparently the entire population of France loved it.
It didn't go well with the people.
Okay. Now, I have to say, Nabila, that the overwhelming problem for politicians in Australia is that people are not only bored with them, they're irritated with them, and they're deeply, deeply sceptical about the democracy wherein they dwell. Is this ennui a part of what's happening in France?
Very much so, and that's a very important point. And one of the reasons why President Sarkozy has been deeply annoying is not only because of his fascination with money, but more importantly, that several allegations have emerged, allegedly were putting stressing Sarkozy's alleged involvement in political scandals. His 2007 presidential campaign has allegedly been funded by Gaddafi himself, and that it's beyond an allegation put forward by Gaddafi's son.
Not a good look.
No, not at all. New documents have emerged, backing that up. And it's no coincidence that as soon as President Sarkozy got elected in 2007, he invited Gaddafi on a 5-day visit in France, dining him at the Ritz, showing him around the Versailles Palace. And his alleged success in Libya has to be strongly qualified. And the French do not also forget that at the beginning of the uprising in Tunisia, the French foreign minister made that infamous speech in Parliament when she offered President Ben Ali, support in how to, crack down on democratic, demonstrations.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to wind it up, and I thank you, Dominique and Nabila, for a very spirited contribution. Journalist extraordinaire, Nabila Ramdani and Dr Dominique Moisi, the founder of the French Institute of International Affairs. Dominique's most recent book is The Geopolitics of Emotion, How Cultures of Fear, Humiliation and Hope are Reshaping the World. Great title, Dominique. It's published by Knopf Doubleday. And next, as promised, an extraordinary politician who doesn't fit any of the the categories that we've been discussing rather glumly. One of Cambodia's most prominent campaigners against human rights abuses, LNL, on RN.